Azizi Seixas, currently an assistant professor at NYU Langone Health in the Department of Population Health and Psychiatry. And my research interests can be summed up in three ways. One is looking at multi-level determinants of health, particularly chronic health conditions, such as cardiovascular disease, as well as brain health. As well as I try to understand how potentially behavioral factors, I call these the four pillars of health behaviors, which include sleep, physical activity, diet, and stress management, and try to understand how those behaviors impact the presence and the development of cardiovascular disease and brain health. And by brain health, I mean mental illness as well as neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, dementia. And so the second area of my research really tries to understand how sleep health impacts all of that, right? And what are the determinants of sleep health, such as behavioral determinants, as well as psychological determinants, as well as environmental determinants. And by determinants, essentially, I mean what factors actually are associated with these different outcomes. And that's the key thing. And third, my research focuses on developing what I call precision and personalized population health strategies that can help us to alleviate and to improve the burden of cardiovascular disease as well as brain health. By that, I use machine learning and artificial intelligence solutions as well as mobile technology solutions in order to optimize treatment so that the individual gets the right treatment at the right time. So what drew me to sleep, particularly in terms of how sleep impacts cardiovascular disease and brain health? It's two things, to be quite honest. One is personally. I recognize that all of us, particularly living in a very high-paced lifestyle as well as living in a high-paced city like New York, that we oftentimes don't get enough sleep. They always say New York is the city that never sleeps. And so it's very tough, right? And one of the things that I've also recognized that sleep is oftentimes the forgotten health behavior that increases risk for cardiovascular disease. It affects your functioning, particularly your mood. It affects how you perform in terms of your cognition. It particularly for athletes as well too, who may actually want to have that peak performance. Sleep is connected. I oftentimes consider sleep as an epiphenomenon. What does that mean? It means it can serve as a risk factor, meaning it could be the cause of cardiovascular disease. It could serve as a correlate, meaning there's some health condition going around, but it seems to be wherever this particular chronic health condition appears, sleep is there. So there's something there. We can't really understand the causality behind it. And then sleep can also be a consequence. What does that mean? It means when people who actually go through depression, oftentimes what usually is affected, their sleep. And so in some ways, it's like a transactional circle whereby sleep can be the predictor and a risk factor for chronic health condition. It could be a surrogate or right beside each other with that chronic health condition, and it may be a consequence of that particular chronic health condition. And so with the two together, my own personal experience as well as recognizing that sleep is so pivotal, it's a primordial thing. We all have to sleep, but we don't get enough of it. And so this is why sleep has been my first use case to be able to understand it. Also, it impacts all the other health behaviors. Your sleep, a lot of studies have shown this. Sleep impacts what you eat, your food choices, your appetite. So that's one other area where if we focus on diet and nutrition, sleep is the key thing that fundamentally shows that. Why? Studies have shown people who are sleep deprived tend to eat more. Night snacking, they tend to eat more carbohydrates, and they eat all these different types of fatty foods. And not just that, because you're not sleeping, your body is unable to metabolize those foods well. Therefore, you may pack on more pounds. Another area, sleep impacts your physical activity. How does that mean? Well, if you don't sleep enough, then guess what? You don't actually have enough energy for physical activity. So the energy that you need is important, right? And so if you sleep and you have a restful night, then you're more likely. I give you an example of that. There was a wonderful study done that showed, looking at two different folks. One group, they slept, right? And they actually exercised. And another group that just exercised, but they were sleep deprived. And what they were able to show is that the folks who actually slept had more health benefits gained from their physical activity as opposed to the group that did not get enough sleep. And so it just goes to show that sleep impacts diet, it impacts eating behavior, it impacts physical activity. And the last health behavior pillar is stress. We all know this. Whenever we actually don't get enough sleep, we're more irritable, we can't process things. Here is it that you might be in a wonderful conversation with somebody and they just say something, and just your level of processing the meaning behind what they said can really be skewed because you lack the necessary sleep. And so in many ways, sleep is this primordial epiphenomenon that affects all components of our life. So many people debate this, right? That sleep in many ways is this unconscious process. And in many ways, that's what we call sleep. One way in which we actually have done this scientifically is that when there is a presence of different brain waves, right? And so there have been many studies that have shown this through EEG monitoring, that when you go through certain phases of sleep, and so there are generally different stages of sleep. And so each stage is really important for bodily function. All species need to sleep in many ways, right? And so here's a primary reason, and we're going to focus on humans, right? So 3 reasons, and it's debatable. Some people might say there are more reasons why we need to sleep. The first is it really helps us to facilitate this process called homeostasis, right? Many of us might say, well, that's a very jargony term. Those of us who took high school biology might remember this. I was like, I don't remember. Maybe that's what it was. Essentially, it's keeping the body's environment equal, ensuring that there is this equilibrium. And so if you're constantly going, then guess what happens? Things are going to be off balance. I would say in many ways it's as if the body is a machine, right? And what happens in this case is if your body is like a machine and all the pistons and all the different mechanics are working and there is no time for rest, guess what happens? It will wear out, right? And that is the key thing that you don't want to occur. So homeostasis is important for that. This is a natural biological physiology and an important thing. That's why we need to do. The second reason, rejuvenation, right? Oftentimes, if your organs are going, right? It allows your body to have that rest, but to replenish itself. That is the key thing. So not just being able to facilitate homeostasis where you get that biological balance, right? But it also helps to rejuvenate for the next day. And so this is during sleep when most of the organs are actually replenishing, cleaning out all of the toxins so that you're rejuvenated. Third reason is more so a brain-related reason. Oftentimes we think that this is where memory consolidation occurs. So let me give you an example. Life is filled with a whole bunch of experiences. How do we process each of those experiences? Because each experience is a learning moment. And the brain works like a computer whereby it really stores all of those experiences, some of which we're conscious of, some of us that we're not so conscious of. But the brain is storing it. So how do you consolidate and how do you make meaning of all of that? And you make meaning of that through memory, right? And so the brain, and through sleep, your brain is able to do that, and that's the one way. Another corollary reason, and it's brain related, that there have been some animal studies that have shown, and there have been some slight human studies that have shown that sleep, for the most part, is the only phase where your brain gets to really get cleaned. What we call this washing, right? A big word is this glymphatic system. And so it's called the glymphatic system. And so what happens is the brain in many ways, through this thing called cerebrospinal fluid, washes the brain at night, and it only does that through sleep. It's very tough to do it while awake. The lymphatic system, which is responsible for the other organs, can for the most part do that while conscious, but it optimally does that while sleeping. But the glymphatic system is not able to do that, and it has to do it through sleeping. So my work looking at the relationship between sleep health and cardiovascular disease. And sleep health is considered as not just looking at sleep duration. We consider sleep duration as just one component of sleep. There are other components such as quality, regularity is one. Alertness, which is the consequence of when someone wakes up to see if they are alert, right? Satisfaction is another component. The timing of the sleep is important. The efficiency of the sleep is also another component. And duration is just one. So I look at all of those components, primarily sleep duration, because it's one of the more global measurements of sleep. It's one of the most easily measured parameters and components of sleep. And looking at how that is related to cardiovascular disease, particularly heart health. And that could be hypertension, diabetes, and stroke. And so the reason why there is a relationship between sleep, particularly sleep deprivation, which is shortened sleep, and cardiovascular disease, can be explained in one way. That when someone actually doesn't sleep at night, one of the components of, or the primordial functions of sleep, being homeostasis and rejuvenation, is that when someone is not sleeping, that they are really at a heightened sense of alertness. And when you're at a heightened sense of alertness, there's greater levels of blood flow, right? And it actually stresses the body, and by stressing the body, it stresses the heart. What happens biologically at night is that our blood pressure dips. We call that blood pressure dipping. This is an important feature because that's part of the homeostasis, because what you don't want is that you don't want your heart to be pumping hard throughout the entire day because it stresses the structure of the vessels. Vessels can get worn from that, and it can lead to other factors like stroke in terms of infarcts and all. So that is the primary reason and mechanism behind the relationship between sleep and cardiovascular disease. Heightened sense of alertness, which can cause organ damage, right? Because it doesn't allow for homeostasis and rejuvenation, which can lead to elevated blood pressure. As a result, if there is not any proper metabolism of glucose levels when someone is asleep, that is also an important factor, which can really cause insensitivities to insulin, so your body is unable to process glucose, which can then lead to diabetes. And so those are some of the mechanisms behind sleep deprivation and cardiovascular disease / heart disease. Yeah, and if you're awake, chances are you're eating, So you're either eating or doing something, and it's not actually processing and it doesn't reach that level of homeostasis either. So it keeps elevated, and what oftentimes happens is that whenever you want to keep awake, your body's gonna crave some food. It could be coffee, it could be some sweet thing, it could be nuts or whatever. And so that in many ways can stress the body over a longer period of time, particularly the metabolism system that is important and needs rest as well. A perfect night of sleep is when you go to bed and you fall asleep quickly and you wake up refreshed. And I say that tongue in cheek. And I say that tongue in cheek. And it should be that simple. But if I were to give you and your audience sleep hygiene tips, that I think is important. And so there are several things that can prevent you from actually initiating sleep, maintaining sleep, and which are classic insomnia-like symptoms. And so what you want to be able to do is that there are several things that you want to do so that you can improve or optimize your chances of having a good night's sleep, particularly initiating sleep, meaning falling asleep. So what you want to do is you want to ensure that you refrain from actually eating heavy meals right before bedtime. It's tough. You can't do that, right? You want to also refrain from having very strenuous activity immediately before. You want to avoid stressful situations, right? If you're on the phone and you're speaking to a family member and they gave you some very distraught, stressful news, that will perhaps affect your sleep. You want to avoid blue light. Blue light oftentimes comes from our cell phones. Blue light has an activating effect, and it's good when you want to be awake, but not so much. And the reason why that is so is because it actually affects the component of our brain that produces melatonin, and melatonin is a hormone that prepares the body for sleep. And so the exposure to blue light and very, very stressful light can prevent the onset and production of melatonin, which prepares you. And that's why that is the case. So when it comes to blue light, I highly recommend that people refrain from blue light 30 minutes to an hour before bedtime, which means shut off the computer. Don't check social media on your cell phones or any type of mobile device before. I know it's tough, but it's important that you do that. And try not to sleep with your device close to bed either. You don't want to do that because it can significantly disrupt your sleep. So TVs do emit blue light, and they would be classified as devices that emit blue light, which compromises the production of melatonin, which prepares your body for sleep, as well as your laptops, as well as your tablets. So when it comes to the relationship between sleep and brain health is categorized as more so mental health and neurodegenerative diseases, that there has been some link between the two, whereby sleep deprivation is linked with the onset and the risk of Alzheimer's dementia. And many people believe that it's a different type of mechanism, and this is where the field is a little bit unsettled. There have been studies that have shown that individuals who actually report shorter sleep or who are sleep deprived tend to actually have greater risk of dementia, and they do that by looking at amyloid beta, which is a potential surrogate or marker or biomarker for Alzheimer's dementia risk. With regards to the relationship between sleep and mental health, there have been folks who have shown that sleep deprivation can be linked with anxiety, as well as long sleep duration can be linked with lethargy, which is a component of depression, as well as the reverse can be seen, whereby individuals who are depressed will report shortened sleep and as well as insomnia-like symptoms. So with regards to the relationship between inflammation and sleep, there have been some folks who have looked at that. In our own work, we haven't looked specifically at whether or not sleep or sleep deprivation causes inflammation, but several folks, like my colleagues, have shown studies where they have evidence and found that there is an indirect relationship between sleep and cardiovascular disease, and inflammation seems to be the wedge that connects the two. We have done work looking at this concept called accelerated aging, and we have found, so accelerated aging is when your biological age is actually far greater than your chronological age. So what does that mean? It means that if you are 45 years old, but your biological clock says you are 64 years old, which means your age is accelerated. And what we have found in our study of a national data set, and we've looked primarily at accelerated heart age. I know others have looked at just aging in general, looking at different clinical as well as biological and inflammatory markers. We have looked at heart age using a well-validated instrument that looks at blood pressure, cholesterol, and age, and all these different types of factors. And that what we found is that folks who are short sleepers, meaning they get 6 hours or less, are more likely to have accelerated heart ages. And we've found racial ethnic differences as well too, where on average a 60-year-old black person has an average accelerated age of 20 to 29 years if they report short sleep. Think about that. So they're 30 years old on average in terms of heart health. That's a significant racial ethnic difference, and we saw that with regards to Hispanics as well, where we found a 15 to 20 year accelerated heart age. But oftentimes, many people talk about this concept called sleep debt. And this is where, to be quite honest, there isn't general consensus. Some people say, well, you can't really recapture sleep debt, right? Where sleep loss can't be sleep gain, right? And it's tough. It's really tough. But with regards to looking at if sleep can help the body deal with toxicity, absolutely can. So we've done some studies that have shown that less industrialized societies tend to have better sleep, but less industrialized societies and maybe closer to the equator, and there's so many different factors that might go in place. So we've done studies looking at in Africa, in the Caribbean, which are closer to the equator, but then they have more exposure to sunlight, and then sunlight actually helps with sleep-wake cycle balance. And so folks who are in more Nordic regions, in northern regions, have less sunlight, and as a result, it does not help with the production of melatonin, which then doesn't improve quality of onset and quality of sleep. The vitamin D is important, and it's been proven to be effective in immune health, and immune health is linked to inflammation, and inflammation is important with all different types of chronic health conditions, as well as aging process. And so I'm not saying that people in Nordic regions are screwed, but it doesn't regulate the sleep-wake cycle well. And this is why so many different products have come where it emits different types of lighting, particularly blue light and not so much, in order to give someone exposure to enough sunlight so that it can regulate their sleep-wake cycle. With regards to naps, naps are okay. And this is where, again, the field is a little on the fence. My thought, and this is my opinion, that naps should be no more than 20 minutes or so. And it also depends what time of the day you take the nap. Let me explain the two reasons. There are two processes that initiate sleep. We call it process C, process S. Process C has to do with your circadian biology, your 24-hour clock. and process S, which is your sleep, which is more so the hunger or the thirst to sleep. It builds up over a period of time. They usually go in sync, right? What does it mean? It means, therefore, that as your circadian clock is coming down, your thirst for sleep should go up, and vice versa. Now, what happens is that your circadian clock will naturally go up and down throughout the given 24-hour cycle. What you want to be able to do is to time that, which is why some people go to bed at 9, 10 o'clock at night, because at that point in time, they're so exhausted, their circadian clock has gone down, but by then, the built pressure for sleep has increased so that it's easy to initiate sleep, right? And so that's one area, one way of explaining what happens during sleep. So with regards to process C and process S, if you sleep, or if you take a nap rather, you interrupt this kind of an interplay between process C and process S, which is why it's important initially to, when I said, you don't want to sleep more than 20 minutes or so, because then you actually lose that built-up pressure of that process S. That's key. The second component is you don't want to take a nap too close to your normal bedtime, because it throws off that rhythm as well. So one, if you sleep too long during a nap, it kind of relieves the process S pressure that you need built up in order to initiate sleep. But if you take a nap too close to bedtime, it disrupts the rhythm of that. So the relationship between sleep and night shift is quite a noxious one. It's harmful. So you mentioned your friend who unfortunately passed of a heart attack while on his night shift. And you were saying, well, he had the telltale signs of being unhealthy. He was obese, he didn't have good health. And one of the things that I would say is that perhaps the reason why he was unable to maintain good health, and the reason why he was unable to, manage his weight, was because of that night shift. And I'm not saying all night shift is bad, but there are certain adjustments that need to be made. And it's tough, because our bodies are so programmed to sleep-wake cycle being tied to day and night that your body is in reverse. You're fighting nature in many ways, as well said. You are fighting nature, and it's tough, and there are different things that you can do. You can, we often tell people this, very, very low budget, have really dark curtains so that when you head home, you kind of mimic like nighttime, and that's important. Oftentimes when people come off of night shifts, they tend to do their chores or run their errands. Try not to do that, because then it just disrupts your cycle. So try not to do anything strenuous. I would really mimic day as night, and really practice some sleep health hygiene tips.
That goes audibly too, right? Trying to keep all.
Yes, definitely. Noise, and that's tough. Yeah, exactly. So you want to ensure that you make wherever you sleep, whether a bedroom or wherever, a sanctuary. And a hot shower can help. Drinking some tea can help as well. Blocking out all possible environmental distractions is another thing. Try and block out all internal stressors as well too. So, oftentimes night shifts can be stressful. I know, particularly in the healthcare sector with nurses, it's tough if they just came off a 12-hour shift. They're already on high alert, and that can be tough. So I would recommend that they unwind. It's key that they practice that, or else they can unfortunately reap the negative and adverse consequences of poor sleep and sleep deprivation. When it comes to sleep and athletes, particularly performance and training, it's absolutely key. There are several different faculties and different things that athletes need. Let's start from head to toe. Athletes need to be in the right state of mind, even while training. And sleep can affect their mood. It can affect their motivation. And it's important that athletes are well rested because it can affect those different areas, and it's absolutely key. So also, you need to feel well rested. And athletes need that, and the brain needs to feel well rested, and there's no difference. Athletes rely a lot on strategy depending on the different skills that are needed for athletes, whether it be track and field, or soccer or football, that athletes need to do that. Well, particularly in football, if you need to study a playbook, if you're sleep deprived, the last thing I saw, playbooks are very, very, big, complex, strategic books. And so your inability to comprehend and to simulate different plays might be compromised by sleep deprivation. So that's key. So let's move from head to toe. With regards to, training one's muscles, sleep is important, particularly in recovery after training. That is key. Studies have shown that athletes who are sleep deprived oftentimes are more prone to injuries, as well as having consistent injuries, because they're not giving their bodies or their muscles enough time to rest and to rejuvenate, which are two of the pillars of an importance of sleep. And so those are some of the primary reasons why sleep is important. Now, if you were to put the head and the body together, the most important thing for the athlete is to ensure that they have peak performance, right? And so I know some people have looked at this where they've studied basketball teams, and they've looked at how, the circadian rhythms. It's not just sleep. So they've looked at the circadian rhythm of athletes. And so it's well documented that athletes or teams that live on the West Coast traveling east have a hard adjustment because it's almost as if they're kind of, in a way, socially jet lagged in some ways, and the same phenomenon going from east to west, because your bodies are just so accustomed and primed to perform at a certain given time that if your sleep is disrupted or your circadian rhythm is just off, then it can impact negatively your performance, which is the ultimate thing. Not just in terms of ensuring that the muscles are primed, but also to ensure that the brain is thinking. So you have that hand-eye coordination, which many sports rely on. And so that's the key fundamental reasoning behind the relationship between sleep and athletes. So the relationship between consistency of going to bed and performance among athletes is key. Reason being is if athletes are so primed and used to performing at a certain given time, that any sort of sleep disruption can throw off that equilibrium of peak performance. And so one of the things that I would highly recommend that athletes do, and I know this is what a lot of teams have done, they have sleep specialists as well as sports psychologists as part of their teams, where if they're traveling east or west or wherever where there's a significant time zone difference, that they would actually start preparing the athletes to simulate their bodies to mimic the time zone that they're going to. And they try and do that a week ahead of time. Some teams actually go 2-3 days ahead of the game in order to simulate that. So the future of sleep research is vast. There's so many things that we have to discover. Measuring sleep is a huge area that needs to be explored. More devices, more cutting-edge devices, more portable devices are needed to be able to measure sleep. In addition to that, there are more devices, such as the use of artificial intelligence, in scoring sleep stages as opposed to having a scorer, or a technician score the different stages. I know there are many folks using artificial intelligence algorithms to be able to determine different sleep stages. In addition to that, and in my own work, not only are we looking at trying to be able to define and to identify sleep stages, we want to be able to modify sleep using different AI and technological tools. And so in many ways, there's going to be an explosion of sleep research using technology and the best technologies that we have, because many people believe that sleep may be the enigma of life that helps us to be healthier, to live more fulfilling lives. The fountain of youth, perhaps, right? Yes.